Okay, so for 36, you just have to simply find the amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical translation from a sinusoidal function, sin x or cos x. You're going to sketch the graph, and you're going to have to mark the x and y axis appropriately. Okay, so for letter A, we have f of x equals 2 times the sine of 3, x minus pi over 6 plus 5. So again, you're going to go through and identify amplitude, period, or the B value. In this case, your B value is 3, so you have to solve for the period, the phase shift, and then the vertical translation. And all of that you get directly from the equation. So in this case, the 2 comes directly from the A value. The period comes from the definition of the equation 2 pi over b. Your period is equal to 2 pi over b. So 2 pi over 3 is going to be your period. Your phase shift is pi over 6 to the right because it's minus, and then your vertical translation up is that plus 5. So we're going to put all of this information together and we are going to graph it. The first thing that you're going to need to figure out is you're going to need to figure out where your top and bottom of the graph are, and then also the midline. In this case, that vertical translation up gives you that midline right there. So from this value of 5, you're going to know that your midline runs right here through the y value of 5. So there's your midline. Okay? Now, after you determine your midline, you want to then use the amplitude to determine the top and bottom of the graph. So again, that was step 1. You wanted to use your vertical translation. Step 2, you want to use the amplitude to determine the top and bottom. So step 2, maybe I should write step 2, you know your amplitude's 2, so from this line you're going to go up 2, and you're going to go down 2. So you find out that the top of this graph is at 7, and you find out the bottom of the graph is at 3. Alright, so next what you want to do is you now want to use your period to determine where all of your critical points are. Alright, so using now your period of 2 pi over 3, you know that from start to finish of this graph, so this is, let's say it's a sine, or let's do a cosine graph. So if this were a cosine graph, or no, sorry, this is sine, so let's do sine. Okay, so you know a sine graph starts in the midline, goes up, and comes back down. So how many critical points do you have along the way? Well, you have the top, the middle, the bottom. And so that's basically divides your graph into 4 equal parts. So you have part 1 down here. Here's part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. So your graph is always divided into basically 4 equal parts. So if you take the period, which in this case is 2 pi over 3, and you divide your period into 4 equal parts, then you're going to find a really easy way to what to count by. So in this case, dividing by 4 is the same as multiplying by 1/4, and I'm left with 2 pi over 12. Simplifying that gives me pi over 6. Now in this case, pi over 6 is going to work because also notice my phase shift is also pi over 6. Okay, so counting by pi over 6 is going to be the easiest way to do this graph. So you're going to, first is going to be pi over 6, then 2 pi over 6, but 2 pi over 6 simplifies to pi over 3, then 3 pi over 6, but 3 pi over 6 simplifies to pi over 2, and then 4 pi over 6, which simplifies to 2 pi over 3, and then 5 pi over 6. So notice that all of these are just increments of pi over 6, but simplified fractions. So I'm going to start my sine graph at pi over 6 because of the phase shift. So again, my phase shift is pi over 6 to the right. So I'm going to move my graph over to pi over 6, and now all I need to do is graph those critical points of the sine function along the way, and I have my graph. Okay? Now you could continue that in both directions if you needed to, but at this point, since you already have all of these axes labeled, you've kind of essentially labeled your points here, but it's always a good idea to go ahead and get in the habit of labeling pi over 6, comma, 5. So pi over 6, comma 5, and then this is pi over 3, comma 7, and then here you have pi over 2, comma 5, etc. So it's always a good idea to get in the habit of labeling those critical points along the way of your graph.